Okay, so this section is 2.4, and what we're basically doing is looking at some application problems having to do with the linear equations with the lines. So we're going to be writing some equations in y equals mx plus b form and slope-intercept form, and then in a lot of these they'll also ask us a question, but I do want us to write the equation for each of these, not just find a number value to answer a question. So here's the first one. There's 4 total. Here's the first one. Atlanta is 1,010 feet above sea level. You decide to go on a hot air balloon ride. The balloon rises at 50 feet per minute. Find an equation to figure out how high above sea level you will be after 10 minutes. Okay, so let's go through and let's think about this. So if this is sea level, Atlanta is 1,010 feet above sea level. So I'm going to kind of make a coordinate grid there. I think that's going to be our y-intercept. And then we're rising 50 feet per minute after we take off from the ground here in Atlanta. So I think that 1,010 is going to be our y-intercept in y equals mx plus b form, which means I know the b. Now the other thing that I know is that it's rising 50 feet per minute. So 50 feet over 1 minute. Now that's my slope. That's how fast I'm rising. That's my rate. The slope is almost always a rate. That's why it's given as a fraction, rise over run. So that's my rate. So here's my equation. Now let's answer the question. Write an equation, we got that, to figure out how high above sea level you will be after 10 minutes. So I need to plug in my 10 for my x right here and number crunch it down so that I can answer my question. So I end up with 500 plus the 1,010, which would be 1,510. Now that's how high we'll be, so that would be in feet. Now in that 10 minutes, we've risen 50 feet, but we're 1,510 feet above sea level because we started up at 1,010. Okay, now our second one's going to be a little bit different. So here's what it says. A candle is 6 inches tall after burning for 1 hour. Now how long the candle burns affects its height, right? After burning for 3 hours, the candle is 5.5 inches long. Find the rate per hour that the candle is burning. I think that's going to be our slope. And then write an equation to find out how tall the candle is after 10 hours. Now, they gave me 2 pieces of information here. They told me about after 1 hour, and they told me about after 3 hours. I'm going to use that to write 2 points. So after 1 hour, and you want to make x, called the independent variable, but it's the one that affects the other one. How long that candle burns affects its height. So I'm going to make the x the independent variable, the one that affects the other one. The other one's the dependent variable. How tall your candle is depends on how long it burns for. And 3 hours and 5.5. I'm going to write this as 5.5. Okay, now if you look at this, you'll see that I've got 2 points here. If I've got 2 points, I can write an equation. We did that in the last section. You will need to go through and use your slope formula. That's what they asked us for first anyway, to find the slope, and then plug in a point to find the equation. So let's start with our slope. So remember, your slope formula is y2 minus y1 over same thing with the x's. And so I'm going to plug in my stuff. Okay, so here I have negative 0.5 over 2. So that will be negative 1/4. Now it makes sense that my slope's negative because the candles are burning down. They're getting smaller, which is why my slope's negative. My line would be going down. Okay, so now let's plug it into point slope. Here's point slope form. I'm going to use the 1/6 because I really honestly do not want to deal with a fraction. I think I'm going to have a little bit of a fraction going on anyway, but I would rather minimize how much fraction. Okay, so distributing out my negative 1/2, I have negative 1/2 x plus 1/2, and then I'll bring my 6 over. Okay, so negative 1/2 x plus 6.5. Okay, now there's my equation. The last question they asked, and I'm just going to squeeze it in right here. The last question that they asked is about how tall the candle will be after 10 hours. Hours are my x's, so I need to plug in that 10 for my x right here. Okay, so half of 10 is 5. And when I add these together, I'll have 1.5. So after 10 hours, the candle's 1.5 feet tall. No, inches tall. I don't think the candle's going to be in feet. Okay, this next one's kind of similar to this. So there are 55 blades of grass in 1 square inch of lawn. Okay, that's going to give me 1 point, I think, right there. How much yard there is affects how many blades, so my point is 155. There are 230 blades of grass in 4 square inches. How many blades are there in 3 square inches? And I probably should have also put in there to write the equation. So let's do the equation first and then we'll answer the question. So I'm going to find my slope. So y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So 175 on the top and divided by 3 is 58.1/3. Okay, so my slope is 58.1/3. Now I have it in my calculator. Probably a good idea to do this in your calculator because this one's going to get messy. And I'm going to use the 1 and 55. Okay, so distributing out my 58.1/3, I have 58.1/3 x minus 58.1/3. And then I'll add my 55. Okay, so when I add the 55, I'll have 3 1/3. Alright, so there's my equation. Now the question they asked about is if you have 3 square inches of yard, how many blades of grass are there? So I'm going to plug in the 3 for the x. Okay, so 58.1/3 times 3, I'm doing this in my calculator, is 175, which makes sense because I kind of did the opposite of that right there, minus 3 1/3. is 171 2/3. So that's how many blades of grass I have. Now I can't have 2/3 of a blade of grass, so I'm going to have to round that somehow. So let's say we've got 172 blades of grass. All right, here's our last one. After 5 months, the number of subscribers to a newspaper was 5,730. After 7 months, the number of subscribers to the newspaper was 6,022. How many subscribers will there be after 10 months? So it looks to me like time is the independent variable here. That's affecting how many subscribers you have. So here's my first point and my second point. Now let's do the same thing. Let's write our equation. Then we'll deal with actually answering the question about after 10 months. So y2 minus y1 to get my slope over the x's, x2 minus x1. And then in the top, I've got 292. So this is nice, we won't have a fraction. 146 is my slope. So I'm going to plug in, and I'm just going to use this point. I'm going to plug into point slope form. So y minus y1 equals slope times x minus x1. And then number crunch my stuff out. So 730, negative 730, and then I'll bring my number over. This is kind of interesting. I've got the 5,000. So y equals 146x plus 5,000. So I guess they started with 5,000 subscribers. Okay, so let's answer our question. How many subscribers will there be after 10 months? The number of months is my x, so I'm going to plug it in right there for the x. And I ended up with 6,460 subscribers. Alright, so that's 2.4, a little bit tough with all the word problems. Really be careful about what you pick as your independent variable and what you pick as your dependent variable. It gets really messy if you switch what your x and your y are. It's not that you can't get the right answer, but it's messy and you probably just don't really want to go there. Alright, so that's 2.4.